Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's AEC webinar, Personal Protective Equipment, or better known as PPE, why we use it, how to select it, and why we shouldn't use it unless we have no other choice. I'm Lissa Nelson, your host for today for AEC. Our presenter is Mel Mitchell of Mountain Ridge Metals. Please note, as always, your computer, audio, and telephone lines are muted. If you have any questions during the webinar, select Q&A from your toolbar and type your questions in your dialog box. When Mel is done with his presentation, he will be able to address your questions. And if we run out of time, any questions can be followed up after the fact. You can always email me or Mel directly. Most of you by now know Mel pretty well. He is the Environmental Health and Safety Director for Mountain Ridge Metals, and he is CSP accredited by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. He holds a bachelor's degree in safety from Columbia Southern University. Mel has many, many years, over 30 years of experience in his field of safety. We truly appreciate him sharing his knowledge with us and his commitment to safety. And I am pleased to turn the webinar over to Mel.
Thanks, Lissa, and I'm just going to jump right into it if I can get my slides to progress. There we go. This is a brand new slideshow that I put together. I know we've talked about personal protective equipment in webinars fairly frequently, and I thought we should take a little bit different tack in the way that we approach it for this webinar. So bear with me as we go through this, and basically we're going to be talking about what she said right there on the screen for you. So why do we use PPE? Okay, because OSHA says you got to, right? 29 CFR 1910, multiple subparts, several subparts, and we're going to look at some of them, says you have to protect people from specific hazards such as, and it lists all the hazards there. We all know what a hazard is. I mean, we all have different hazards in our plants, but there's some that are fairly common. In extrusion plants, you usually have noise, audiologic hazards, which is near and dear to my heart because I do wear hearing aids because I was exposed to so much noise as a youngster. We all have heat, hot metal, sharp metal, and then depending on what we're doing, we all have different kinds of chemicals and things. I don't think we have much for radiological hazards and electrical hazards. We all have those too. So let's just keep right on going here. We'll see exactly how long we're going to be here for this today. Right? Why do you use PPE? Well, because you have hazards and you can't eliminate them or control them in some other way. And to do that, we use something called the hierarchy of controls. And I'm going to discuss that more later in the presentation. So bear with me on that. Just remember that. We can't eliminate all the hazards, so we eventually get to the point of PPE. We have a responsibility to protect our employees. I mean, the general duty clause says that we will provide a workplace free of known hazards that could cause serious physical injury or harm to our employees, and the employees have a right to a safe workplace, which is also basically the general duty clause, and that's a big deal. Of course, employers, we have responsibilities, we also have rights, but employees have responsibilities and rights too. So when we're talking PPE, it says here on the slide, we have the responsibility to protect our employees, and the employees have the right to be safe in the workplace. You also have to remember the employees have responsibilities under the rule too. They have responsibilities that when we provide them something and teach them how to use it, they are supposed to do it in the way that we teach them how to use it. If we say you have to wear hearing protection in this area, then they have a responsibility to properly wear the hearing protection in that area, right? So it works both ways. It's a two-way road when we start talking about rights and responsibilities. And really, that's a whole nother webinar at some point there. What are the rights and responsibilities under the rule for employees and employers? It gets pretty deep, okay? So how should PPE be selected? Okay, you should always select PPE based on the risks, and you can intersperse here risks or hazards, whichever word you want to use. You can't say one size fits all. You can't just say, okay, these are the hazards in an aluminum extrusion plant, because one aluminum extrusion plant might have one size press, another one has a different size press. One has a puller, one has a run out table. There are a lot of different variables that you have to go into. So you have to do thorough job safety analysis or job hazard analysis, whichever you want to do, to analyze the risks that are in your workplace, right? This is something that you don't really have an option on. If you look at what everything is going to, all of the ANSI rules, for like machine guarding, and that's a different subject, but I'm going to talk about it just for a second. Like machine guarding, they don't just say you have to guard this now. They say you should do a risk assessment and see what the risks are of this machine, and then you guard the things to minimize the risks to your employees so that they won't get hurt. Well, the same thing goes for PPE, right? And if you don't get your employees involved in the process, then you're not going to have a very successful process. You can walk out there and you can say, I told you to wear this, by God, just because I told you to wear it. And technically they're supposed to wear it, but I guarantee you, as soon as you walk away, they're going to be like safety glasses. I told you you have to wear these safety glasses. Well, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who have been treated that way. You just wear them because I told you to. And then come back around the corner and they have the safety glasses up on their head. Okay? So get the employees involved. When they feel like they own the process, even with PPE, they are going to be more likely to wear the PPE that you give them. All right? So if they're involved, then they're going to take it more, they're going to own the process. Okay, so PPE assessments can either be standalone or part of a JSA or JHA. So I have a couple of examples here. This is the way that we used to do all of our PPE assessments, this right here. And we actually did these years and years ago. I think the first time I saw some of these was back in 2004. And we had our PPE supplier actually come into our plant and look at our processes. And we did these PPE assessments. And hopefully you have the workstation evaluation right up on your screen right now. And I'll just kind of scroll through it. And it talks about the different hazards that are identified, right, for the different parts of the body. And then it goes on down here and it talks about how we use PPE to alleviate those hazards. If this person had to be doing any grinding or anything, they may have to wear face shields. So that would be in here. But this one is just for the press operator. So this is the normal PPE that was prescribed for the press operator. Okay. And then the other thing that you have to have is a certification statement that talks about how it's certified and how you got the stuff done. This assessment consisted of a review of prior injuries and illnesses. That's one thing you look at. A walkthrough audit of the area, discussion of requirements with employees, and review by the Employee Safety Committee to write this PPE assessment. And then it has to be signed and dated, right? If you've ever heard me talk before, when I talk about training or whatever, you've always heard me say, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Well, same thing goes with PPE assessments. Now, the other way that you can do it, that was the standalone PPE assessment. And look, this is not the only two ways. You have to use what works for you, right? So I'm just throwing a couple of things out there. The other way that we do it, and this is the way that we do it now, is we have a job safety analysis. So let me open this, and this is a PDF. It's not a Word document, so it looks a little different. And I'll open this up, and this is what we're using in our plant now. And you see it starts off with the same PPE assessment. and it talks about the hazards identified over here. And then it got the same certification thing right over here. And then it talks about the PPE. Now, the thing that's interesting about this, it's signed, it's documented. We talked about how we did it. It tells the people what PPE to use. But I'm a big person. I like different colors in my documents. So if you look down here at the bottom, it says specific PPE requirements right down here at the bottom are included in this JSA below, the job safety analysis and the guidelines, and they're highlighted green. So if you scroll down, this is actually, see, it has a sequence of job steps over on the left. In the center, it has potential hazards, and on the right, it has recommended actions or procedures, how people avoid those hazards so they don't get hurt. But if you scroll through it, where PPE is mentioned, it's in green. So this is for filling propane tanks. So we're talking about propane and what PPE they should be wearing when they're actually have a possibility of being exposed to propane. So like I said, these are just a couple of the different ways that that PPE can be assessed and risks actually documented and then communicate to the employees. Like I was saying, with the job safety analysis, what we actually do in our facilities is that we take those job safety analysis, and now they have the PPE assessments on it, so we don't have 2 sheets of paper or 4 or 5 sheets of paper. We just have it all in one document. And we laminate these, and we put them at the point where the person that's going to be doing that task actually does it. So if they ever have any questions, they can always just look at it, or better yet, when what the real purpose is when the supervisor is training people, the supervisor can pick this document up right there in the laminated thing and go over it with the employee and say, look, didn't you see this? This is the way that you're supposed to be doing it. It's right here. You guys helped to write this. You said that is correct. Now, if it's not correct, let's get it changed. It's a living document where things can change, right? PPE should always be assigned, like I said, based on the risks or based on the hazards. It should be selected that way. It should never be selected based on feelings or guesses. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here and just as we go through this. So just kind of bear with me, right? So let's just talk about a few different things. Here's hearing protection. Okay, hearing protection is covered in 1910.95, which is the noise exposure rule in OSHA. You have to assess your noise to determine what hearing protection needs to be worn. I have been into plants before. It's been a long time, but I have been into plants before where everybody just is wearing a hearing protection. And I say, okay, what's the noise level in here? Yeah, it sounds noisy. And they say, yeah, well, it's just noisy, so we just made everybody wear hearing protection. Well, as far as OSHA is concerned, that's a way wrong answer, okay? You have to know what the noise levels are so you can select the correct hearing protection to protect from those noise levels. So if you have what the noise level above 85, some people are required to wear hearing protection above 85 decibels on an 8-hour time weighted average. If you have a noise level of, say, 150 decibels, you may have to put people in earplugs and ear muffs and limit their amount of time being exposed to that noise. But you have to know what the noise is to be able to tell what they need to wear and how long that they need to wear it. Okay, so you always have to conduct for noise a noise assessment, which is personal monitoring, where the people walk around with the little things hanging on their belt and the little microphone that clips on their shirt or whatever up near their ear, and it measures how much noise they're exposed to. And then an industrial hygienist takes that data and tells you this is what the 8-hour average is, what those people are being exposed to. Okay, so that's just the way that it has to be done. Now, when you're selecting PPE for hearing, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because hearing is, like I said, is kind of near and dear to my heart because I do wear hearing aids to be able to hear people with high-pitched voices and things. I can't hear anything high-pitched. when you're selecting this stuff, like those yellow and orange earplugs on the upper left-hand corner of my slide there, those are called ear soft, EAR soft earplugs. And those are rated to a noise reduction rating of 33. And then you have to take off a certain percentage of that. So in reality, they will only protect down to about 28 decibels. So if you have to get the noise inside that person's ear down to 90, then those will protect up to 118 decibels of noise to get it down to 90. It's really not enough, and that's only if they wear it correctly. So you may have to put them in earplugs and muffs. The other thing about those, just for instance, one of the neat things there about those particular earplugs, that little orange ring on there, that's the only company I know of that does that. And we use those in our plant in some locations because you have to give the employees a selection of earplugs, and they do like those because they're very soft. And if the employee has that earplug in their ear and you can see that orange ring, then they do not have it in their ear correctly. So it's a very clear visual for you as an employer to know that your people are wearing their earplugs correctly or not. So that's just a neat little thing about that. All right. If you do have high noise, you also have to have hearing tests every year. You have to have a hearing protection program. And like I said, you have to give the opportunity of a variety of hearing protectors. So some people will, I have had people say, oh, it doesn't make any difference what your earplug it is, it hurts my ears. Okay, well, we'll get you some muffs, and we get them some good muffs. If you are buying ear muffs, you got to do what you think you need to do, but let me just say, you get what you pay for. All right, if you go out and buy a cheap $10 pair of earmuffs, they're probably going to be very uncomfortable for the employees. So go out and get something good for them that they can wear and be comfortable in. Okay. Another one that's a pretty difficult standard is the respiratory protection standard. Okay. I have walked into plants before and walk into a paint line, and the person back in the paint line is wearing a full Tyvek suit with a hood and a full face respirator. And I look at them and I'm like, holy moly. What? And it doesn't smell that bad. So I asked the people, I've never been in the plant before. I asked them, why are you wearing this? And he says, oh, it's because that's what I want to wear. Okay. Did we do any air monitoring to find out what the contaminant levels are? No, never been done here. I just like to wear this, so that's what the boss got me. Okay, if you do that and allow your employees just to wear whatever they want because that's what they want to wear, or if you just go out and buy a respirator because that one looks like it'll work and you give it to your employees, you can get in an awful lot of trouble with that. Once again, you have to assess the hazard. You have to have an industrial hygienist or someone come into your plant and actually do personal air monitoring to determine what the hazards are in the air. They'll look at the SDSs for the stuff that the people are using right there. They'll take those SDSs and look for threshold limit values and exposure limits for different chemicals that are in there. And then they will select the proper cassette to draw air through to test for those chemicals. And if they come back and say, yeah, like this particular paint line where the guy was wearing the full face respirator, once we did the monitoring for that, it came back and said, yeah, well, they're 1,000 times below any limits for wearing any respiratory protection in there. It's just a bit of a smell. So that person didn't need to be wearing any respirator as long as the ventilation fans were on in there. So we took the respirators away from them and allowed them to use a voluntary use disposable respirators if they wanted to. All right. So if the hazard present that requires them to wear respirators, or if you tell them that it's mandatory for them to wear a respirator, whether there's a hazard present or not, then you have to have a full-blown respiratory protection program, which requires you to have a medical exam done, medical where you follow the employee medically to make sure that that respirator is not going to put too much strain on their bodies, and that they can wear it properly. The respirators have to be fit tested. You have to have training how to wear them, how to clean them, give them a place to keep them clean at, and all of this has to be kept up continuously, along with several other things in a respiratory protection program. So what I'm saying is, if there is no hazard present once you do your assessment, once you do your testing and your air testing, and they say, yeah, there's nothing here that's going to hurt them, then I would say, look, don't let your employees wear this type of respirator. Oh, wait a minute, I got to back up here. I just went forward. The one up here in the upper left-hand corner, that's considered a tight-fitting respirator. If they're wearing that, you have to have at least part of a respiratory protection program. This one over here is an N95. It's a disposable respirator. If they want to wear it, even though they're not required to, OSHA makes an allowance where you can let them wear these disposable respirators under the voluntary use program. So I'm going to click on this and see if this comes up. It should. And this is what we actually use. And the voluntary use statement is right here in OSHA. That's 1910.134 Appendix D. And this explains what the employee is supposed to know, and that they're wearing the respirator, one of those disposable respirators, voluntarily. And then when they're done with it, they just throw it away, so we don't have to have cleaning and things of it. And then the supervisor signs it and the employee signs it, making sure that they understand. And it alleviates your need to have medical surveillance of that employee and all that kind of neat stuff. So there's a lot of ways that you can do respiratory protection, but my recommendation is, if they don't have to have it, then you shouldn't be supplying it to them unless you use just the voluntary use for its disposable respirators, and they can throw them away after each use. That's the easiest way to handle this rule, and it will still provide plenty of protection for your employees. Okay. So, and one other thing, just as far as the air and the noise monitoring, there are a lot of companies out there that will charge you an awful lot of money to come in and do noise and air monitoring. Since I got out of the Air Force in 2000, every single plant that I have ever taken care of, we have done noise and air monitoring, and I have never paid for it out of our plant's pocket, because most workers' comp insurance providers will help you with it and provide for that. Or if you're a small employer, then you can use the state OSHA consultation service in whatever state you're in, and they'll come in and take care of it for you and do it. And they don't give fines and they don't give citations, just any hazards they find. You have to agree to fix them. So, those two ways to get this done can be really helpful, and it can save you a bunch of money, because this is not a one-time good deal. Noise and air have to be tested initially, the noise levels and the air whenever there's a concern. And then anytime there is a change in your processes or production, they have to be tested again. And I would recommend testing periodically every few years anyway, just to make sure that nothing's changed. So let's continue on. All right, eye protection. Eye and face protection, that's covered under a specific OSHA rule, 1910.133. And this first paragraph is actually what OSHA says about it. It says you should be using appropriate eye and face protection when exposed to eye or face hazards from flying particles, depending on what they're exposed to. Once again, you have to do a risk assessment. Now, with all of these, a lot of you guys are spending, I know how much personal protective equipment costs. You're spending a lot of money on personal protective equipment. Call up your supplier and ask them, whoever's supplying your personal protective equipment, say, hey, I need some help with this if you need help. Let them come in and help you with it. You don't have to buy everything that they say, but they'll come in and they've got knowledgeable people who can come in and help you do hazard risk assessments for the PPE. And a lot of them will send somebody out, and it's not going to cost you anything. I know our PPE provider, we've had the same one now oh gee, since before 2004 that supplies all of our PPE, and they've been in our plant many times, and plants around the country that I know of several times. And any time that I would need something from them, all I would have to do is call them up and say, hey, I need somebody out here to help me with this, and they would send somebody out right away. So take advantage of the things that, yeah, you're buying a lot of PPE from them. It's not like it's free. You got to pay a lot of money for it. And if you can get them to help you out with it, let them, right? OSHA also has some guidance, subpart I, in paragraph appendix B, and I'll see if this works. I'm going to see if it brings up this is actually on the OSHA.gov website right here. And if you scroll, this is appendix B. It's non-mandatory compliance guidelines for hazard assessment and PPE selection. So if you scroll down, it's got lots of stuff here, and it talks about different surveys, different things you can do, but we're talking about eyes right now. So if you look at this right here, starting right here, it's got a selection chart guidelines for eye and face protection. And it's not a complete list, but it's a very good place to start. I mean, you can sit here and go over this eye and face protection selections chart, and it'll talk to things. I mean, right here: impact, chipping, grinding, machining, masonry work, woodworking, sawing, drilling, chiseling, power fastening, riveting, and sanding. What are the hazards? Flying objects, chips, particles, spectacles with side protection, face shields may be needed. And it's got some notes here. Yeah, it takes a little bit of work and a little bit of reading, but it's there. Use it. And if the OSHA guy walks in and does an inspection, and you have a hazard assessment hanging there, and a PPE assessment, and they say, well, how did you determine that? You can jump right back in, if you're familiar with this, and you can say, oh, I used 1910 subpart I appendix B. And at that point, they're sitting there going, wow, I'll tell you what, there are a lot of people in the safety profession who don't know about this. And when you tell an OSHA guy that's doing an inspection for something that you're using their rule and their non-mandatory appendix to determine what PPE is best for a specific job, it's going to look awful good in their eyes. Okay. Now, you don't have to go by everything in here, but it definitely is a good start. I mean, well, that's like any other OSHA rule. OSHA is just the starting place, but this is a pretty good starting place. Okay. So, there's a lot of stuff out there. All right. So let's go right on. Hard hats. Did you know that there are numerous categories and things to select hard hats? I mean, some of them are penetrating hazards. Some of them have electrical stuff to them. There are a lot of things when selecting hard hats, but OSHA basically says you shall ensure that each affected employee wears a protective helmet when working in areas where there's a potential for something to fall on their head. Okay. And once again, right back to the same thing, Appendix B, Section 9. So let's scroll on down, and here's Section 9, guidelines for head protection. All right. And this entire section right here talks about guidelines for head protection. I mean, it's right here to help you out. It talks about the different classes and categories of hard hats and what you need to be looking for. Now, it also sends you to the ANSI rule, ANSI 89 Z89.1 for protective helmets. And, it gives you a lot of guidance. So they're there to help you. All right. So shoes, good. And one of the things that I was I'm going to talk about in a little bit is some of the things that have happened. And when I first went into the Air Force, it was 1980, and the Air Force for combat boots, I was in civil engineering, so I was running heavy equipment and doing a lot of concrete work and stuff like that. And the Air Force issues steel-toed shoes and steel-toed boots. So it was probably about 1982 So I'd been in the Air Force for a couple of years, had some training, and I had the first new troop assigned to me where I was his supervisor and had to take care of him and show him the ropes. And one day, me and this younger guy, we went out to run a jackhammer job. And we loaded up the jackhammers and got in the dump truck and went out on the flight line. And I showed him how to hook the jackhammers up to the airline and showed him how to get started and how to work the jackhammers. Not like it's hard. You put the bit on the ground and chisel into it. So I got him started and I walked around the other side of the truck. And a few minutes later, I heard this guy screaming. So I walked around over to the other side of the truck and here he is laying on the ground, holding onto his foot, and there's blood coming out of his boot. And I said, "What did you do?" And he said, "Well, I've got these steel-toed shoes on, and I wanted to try the steel toes to see if it would protect me." So he had set the jackhammer on top of his steel toe and activated it, and it had basically smashed the steel toe down and broke a few toes and cut the end of one toe off. And anyway. My point is, you need to teach people what they can and can't do, even when it should be common sense, like steel-toed shoes. Don't test the silly things. They're there to protect you if the unforeseen happens. Okay, so enough about that. Anyway, the guy, we took him to the hospital and they had to cut his boot off of him, and he was out of service for a while, but. Just one thing that happened to me years and years ago that I'll never forget. So anyway, foot protection. Once again, right down here at the bottom, paragraph 10 talks about foot protection. So you scroll on down to paragraph 10, and right here it is. And the ANSI rule is ANSI Z41. It talks about the standard for providing impact and compression. Now, one thing that you need to think about when you're talking about foot protection is metatarsal guards. If you look up here in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see this is a device called an IMET guard, okay? And it laces right into the top of your boot, and then it lays on top of the steel toe. Well, at one of the plants that I took care of years ago, a person was working in the die shop, and we did not require metatarsal guards at that time. It was just shortly after I started working in extrusion. So they set the die up on the edge on the table and they turned around. And when they turned around, they bumped the die and it tipped off the table and it landed right on the top of their foot and basically crushed the metatarsals in the top of that person's foot. And they were out of work for several days. And then they were on light duty for several months because of that. So we require now almost everybody that works on the plant floor to wear metatarsal guards, because even if you drop something light on that part of your foot, it's still going to hurt. So we use these IMET guards quite a bit, and we have had people drop dies on top of their foot with this IMET guard in it, and it has bent and broke the IMET guard, but they didn't break their feet. So they do work. So once again, you have to assess the situations. What's the worst case scenario that could happen? And then provide PPE for your people, or require PPE that is going to protect them from whatever that worst case scenario is. Okay? Hand protection. Not all hand protection is created equal. There are things in our plants that are chemicals in some of our plants where we might have different chemical processes for etching aluminum and doing stuff that might eat up a rubber glove, but so you have to select nitrile. There might be some other chemicals that attack nitrile, so you have to select rubber. You might not want to select Spectra because it'll melt, and instead use a heavier Kevlar glove to protect against cuts and burns on the press. This is another spot where you can use the OSHA subpart I appendix B, but this is one that is really helpful to get your PPE provider into your plant to help you with, because some of the chemicals on the SDSs, you have to read pretty deep in there to figure out exactly which types of gloves or which type of PPE that you actually need to use. There's a lot of different things out there, and you just need to be aware of what they are and what they can and can't do. right? There are a lot of other sections. This is just a list. Electrical protective equipment, right? That falls under 29 CFR 1910.137. Now, one thing I'll say about 1910.137, you should also be looking at the NEC standard on arc flash protection, because it is going to be a lot more in depth in protection against arc flash than 1910.137 is. Personal fall protection systems. If you have to have fall protection systems, you need to have someone who is very, very familiar with what is required in a system before you start buying stuff. All right, because there are very specific requirements in fall protection systems to where someone who is not aware, I mean, you can't just go out and buy a harness and throw it at somebody and a lanyard and tell them to attach off to something up there or attach off to something on your high reach. You have to have a certified anchor point, and then the lanyard and the harness need to also be certified for whatever it is that you're doing. HAZWOPER. If you're not familiar with HAZWOPER, you probably should be, especially if you are a large quantity generator of hazardous waste. You should have someone in your plant or on your staff who is certified in HAZWOPER, Hazardous Waste Operations Emergency Response, which has its own requirements for PPE, ranging from just simple coveralls and gloves all the way up to those big suits that you see where they can have self-contained breathing apparatus underneath the suit, and they go into life-threatening situations. Okay, so that is a very specific one. Another very specific spot that requires very specific PPE is permit required confined spaces. And if you do have permit required confined spaces and people have to go into them, you have very, very specific requirements that you have to meet before someone can go into that permit required confined space. Welding and cutting, you have to have different things that are flame proof. You have to have different types of gloves, different types of shirts, clothing, all kinds of stuff. You should be aware of that rule too. And if I don't know of a plant where they don't do welding and cutting. If you're doing welding and cutting, you should have a welding and cutting program that talks about all different kinds of things like fire watches and welding permits and for welding in your plant and things like that. So there's a lot of things. And then finally, toxic and hazardous substances. All of these particular things have very specific PPE requirements. And if you're doing any of these things, you need to be or have someone who is familiar with them, okay? Because it's just the way that it has to be. Okay, why shouldn't we use PPE unless we absolutely have to? Okay, wearing PPE correctly requires proper training. Even something that should be common sense requires proper training. I'm going to say something just a little bit controversial, but with the coronavirus, all the masking mandates, when you just throw masks at somebody and say, everybody's got to wear a mask, and you think, well, that's common sense. Well, no, it's not. And wearing PPE improperly is many times worse than not wearing PPE at all. All right. So if you've got something where you're wearing a mask and it doesn't fit properly, and you're always having to touch it and adjust it and move it, then you're spreading things by actually touching and moving and doing things that you would not normally do. This is the case with all PPE. Never assume that someone knows how to wear PPE, even boots. Here a while back, I was in the plant and I saw a guy walking around and he had on a fairly decent set of leather steel-toe boots with no laces in them, okay? And he had to wear those metatarsal guards that I was showing you, and he had gotten a couple of zip ties from somebody and had that metatarsal guard guard zipped into the tops of his boots. Now, was that really a hazard? Well, no, the metatarsal guard wasn't the hazard. He had his boots on, he had steel toes. But what would have happened if he had to move fast and his boots are flopping around on his feet? What would happen if there was an explosion or there was a fire and he had to get out? And then what happens when he's just walking around and his boot flops around sideways and he falls down and breaks his leg? Now you have a work-related injury because the guy wasn't wearing his boots properly, right? You have to teach them how to wear their PPE, no matter whether you think it is something that's common sense or not. And then you have to write that training down, because if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, okay? PPE not worn properly can actually increase the risk rather than alleviating the risk, okay? Right? Incorrect PPE for the hazard can cause a greater hazard. Like I was saying with the gloves earlier, somebody's messing with a chemical and they don't have anything that says this is the glove that I need to be using when I'm wearing this chemical, when I'm using this chemical. And they just go over to the PPE locker and they see a pair of black rubber gloves and they grab those black rubber gloves and they put them on and they go to start working with this chemical, and the chemical is reactive with rubber. They were supposed to wear nitrile. And now you have an employee that not only has this dangerous chemical on their hands, they also have melted rubber on their hands. Okay, so the wrong PPE can make you have a greater hazard than the hazard originally was. So you need to be doing the assessments and telling the people what PPE that they need to wear. Okay, wearing PPE may give a false sense of security. Believe me, this happens. People think when they're wearing PPE, they're bulletproof. Back when I was in the Air Force, I was stationed for Operation Joint Forge, the Kosovo campaign. I was stationed in Aviano Air Base, Italy, and I was responsible for all of the Air Force people deployed for Operation Joint Forge. And we were also responsible for all of the Army and Marines and anyone else who deployed in and out and maintaining their barracks and making sure that they had billets when they came in and out on aircraft and all that kind of neat stuff. Well, one night I was asleep and I had the cops come in and waking me up and saying, "Hey, we got a problem in the barracks. Can you come?" So I had to get dressed and I had to go into the barracks. Well, turns out a couple of Army guys had gotten drunk and they got into an argument that the guy flak vest could stop a knife. Well, to test it, the guy put on his flak vest and gave his buddy his K-bar knife and said, "Stab me." So his buddy stabbed him in the chest and killed him. All right. Wearing that flak vest gave that guy a false sense of security. It's not designed to stop a knife. It stabbed right through it. I have seen people who have gone and done things that they shouldn't have done because they thought, "Oh, I'm wearing PPE. I'm protected." That's why we try to get rid of the hazard and we try to make it so people can't even get into the hazard. People will do things wearing PPE and they think that they're protected when they're actually not. We talked about trying to test PPE. The kid that I was talking about who actually jackhammered his toe through a steel-toed shoe. I mean, yeah, common sense says you don't do that, but common sense is a rare thing these days. All right. So we actually have something that we use called hierarchy of controls. I talked about it earlier. And it says when you have a hazard, the most effective way to get rid of it is elimination. Physically remove the hazard. If you can get rid of the hazard, then you don't have to worry about it. Next, you substitute. Replace the hazard with something that's not as hazardous. You got a really nasty chemical that you can use something that's not quite so nasty. Use the stuff that's not quite so nasty. I mean, not a PPE story, but a chemical replacement story. I was working at a plant in Montgomery, Alabama, where they made rolled tubes for radiators. And the way that it worked was they would put this flat piece of metal into a mill and it would roll it over until it was a flat tube, and then it would put a little weld down the back side of that tube. And in that roll mill, they had oil that sprayed on all the rollers and everything constantly. and then it went through that welder. And every once in a while, it would catch fire right there where the welder was. Well, one time it caught fire and the fire got a little bit out of hand, and somebody grabbed a fire extinguisher who didn't know how to use it and blasted the oil all over the wall. So now the wall was on fire. And after the fact, and after we got it cleaned up and everything, we started looking at the machine and we said, why are we using oil? And they said, oh, well, it's to cool it. I said, it's not to lubricate it? No, it's just to cool the metal, because as it's rolling, it's getting hot and it has to cool it. And yeah, it provides a little bit of lubrication, but not really. I said, well, why are we using oil? Why don't we use water? And they said, oh, nobody ever thought about it. Well, we took the oil out of the machine and we started using water, and it actually worked better than the oil. So not only did we alleviate a hazard, we fixed something and made it a little bit better. Engineering controls, put up guards, right? That's to isolate people from the hazard. Administrative controls, we change the way people do things to keep them away from the hazard. That could be something where, like I said, the noise says 80, 90 decibels for 8 hours. And so you put somebody in there and they can be exposed to that for 7 hours. They don't get a full dose, although I would probably require them to wear hearing protection anyway. But it's just an example of where you can have a momentary time in there and you rotate your people in and out so that no one gets that full hazardous dose. That's just the way that works. Administrative controls change the way that they work. And as a last resort, we put people in personal protective equipment. There's no way that you're ever going to get away from putting people in personal protective equipment to some point, but we should try to whenever we can. That's why we use this hierarchy of controls. Okay, so the final word, we use PPE because we can't get rid of every hazard. It's just impossible in the facility to get rid of every hazard. I mean, yeah, you'd love to make it so your people could wear tennis shoes or flip-flops while they're at work, but I don't care what you do, somebody's going to have to pick something up and carry it at some point. And if they're carrying loads and they drop it and it falls on their foot, they're required to wear steel toes. I mean, you can't get rid of every hazard. We use PPE because we have to, based on laws and regulations, but the real reason is because we want to protect our employees, who are many times also our friends, and they act an awful lot like our family a lot of times, as much as we possibly can. Okay, so that's basically it. That's my last slide there. And if you have any questions, by all means ask, or you can also contact Lissa and send an email to her, and we can put out the questions to the entire safety team that we have. So Lissa, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, we don't have very many questions at the moment. One did come in, which I can answer. And the question is, are we going to get a copy of this webinar? The webinar has been recorded and it will be uploaded and archived in our AEC technical library, probably by sometime tomorrow. So as long as you have a profile in the AEC database that enables you to access members-only areas of the AEC website, you will be able to access the recording of today's webinar. If you do not have an online profile, let me know and I can help get you set up for that. So that's the only question we have so far, Mel. Let's give it a couple of minutes and see if anything else comes in. Meanwhile, I just want to go ahead and thank you, Mel. Your presentations are always quite well received and extremely important as the extrusion industry strives to become incident-free and safe for all workers. It's always very exciting to see safety moving in that direction. As Mel said, if you think of questions afterwards, after the webinar, reach out to Mel. If you don't have his contact information, let me know or send me your question and I'll forward it to him. We're also going to be sending out an evaluation survey either later today or tomorrow. And we ask you please to participate in that survey. They only take a couple of minutes. And your input is extremely valuable to us. We take all of it into consideration We want to see how we are performing and if we are bringing you the things that you need and are important to you in your career. And also your suggestions for topics and presenters. We also, we read all of that and we take it into consideration when we do future planning. Unfortunately, I have to say our June 23rd webinar has been postponed. That was going to be Ron Manganello of Press Test. He was going to be teaching us how to keep our presses running efficiently. That will be rescheduled for probably a bit later this summer. We're very, very excited that everything is opening up and we are starting to plan our future events as live events once again. We've got our Aluminum Summit coming up in Nashville. That will be September 14th to the 16th. And we're going to be co-locating with the Aluminum Anodizers Council. We did that in 2017 out in Denver, and it was extremely successful. We had almost 400 people attend that. So that is going to be at the Sheraton Music Center in Nashville, Tennessee, a great fun place to go in the fall. So we hope that many of you will be able to join us there. Online registration is open. The hard mailing brochure will be coming to you soon. We also have our press maintenance workshop, which we have rescheduled to October 18th through the 20th, and that will be in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Sonesta Hotel, formerly the Crown Plaza. Online registration for this meeting will be open probably early July, early to mid-July. And we have our safety summit. Got to put a plug in for that. And that is in the plans. We've got a lot of great speakers lining up for that program. That's going to be November 9th and 10th in Rosemont, Illinois at the Lowe's Hotel there. We'll have tabletops and all kinds of exciting safety things going on there. As always, you can find details and updates for all of these events at aecmeets.org, and also check your inboxes for the AEC Meets notices. And of course, we cannot forget about ET, which is going to be next May 3rd through the 5th. We'll have some great in conjunction classes and other optional events on the bookends, Monday the 2nd and Friday the 6th. Come and make a week of it. Bring your family. Stay for the weekend. Go to Disney. All kinds of exciting things coming up. Okay, let me take a look and see if any more questions have come in. Okay, you mentioned having the JSAs signed. Is that required?
Well, I don't think there's anything in the rule that says that it is required. But I have had some people in OSHA interpret that, well, if somebody didn't sign them, how do you prove that they reviewed them? So what I do is I put a signature block on them, and the person that finalizes them is the person who signs them. If you look at the ones that I've done up here, that I had this, all right, the job safety assessment. If you look at that, and I'm just going to bring it back up real quick if I can get my link to work. Here it is. If you look at this one, you know, a lot of times I have signed these, but my philosophy is that I want the people out in the plant to get more and more involved. And this is signed actually by the plant manager in this particular plant. And it's a certification that this was done correctly for the PPE assessment and job safety analysis. And it just shows that much more involvement. So the answer is no, it does not have to be signed, but I would highly recommend that you do have some type of certification and signature block at the end. So that's the best answer I could give you. And my slideshow just closed on me there when I hit the bottom of it. So I don't know. Oh, here it is. It just closed down on me. So I hope I answered the question.
The Inquirer says thank you, Mel. So far, no other questions have come in. Give it another moment or so. Mel, did you want to say anything about the task force you're heading up for the, what is it, the vertical hydraulic press?
For B1117?
Yes.
Yeah, just everybody should still be aware that we are in the process. It has become a lot larger process than what we originally thought, but we are in the process of rewriting ANSI B1117, which is the machine guarding standard for horizontal hydraulic extrusion presses. And instead of being called horizontal hydraulic extrusion presses, it's going to be called horizontal hydraulic extrusion press systems, because we all know that the press can't run without being fed and without having a way to get the metal out of it. So it's going to be a quite a bit more in depth. And of course, anyone who wants to be involved with that, all you have to do is let us know, and we'd be happy to put you on that subcommittee. And we are still trying our best to get extrusion press manufacturers involved. We've had a few people that are on the subcommittee, but they haven't been attending the meetings regularly. So, we're writing it as press users, and we're doing the best that we can. But it would sure be nice if we had some of the manufacturers would come on board and actually help us out. So it's going along. My next meeting is this coming Tuesday afternoon. We'll be having our I think it's our 4th meeting of the subcommittee.
So if anybody is interested or wants more information, by all means, reach out to Mel for that. We do have another comment/question. So this looks very interesting, Mel. Neither ASTM nor ANSI standards allow for the use of add-on devices to protective footwear. However, this does not mean that these strap-on, toe, or metatarsal guards are unacceptable to OSHA. If an employer can provide documentation such as testing data proving that their add-on devices provide protection equivalent to either agency's standards, then an employer is within compliance parameters.
Yep, that's correct. And those IMET guards from the manufacturer, they do meet the standards. And well, my philosophy is, even if it say we were to find that particular device, and they say, well, we're not going to certify it to the ANSI standards. Well, I'll tell you, I've seen them work, and I've seen people drop dies on their feet wearing one of those and not wearing one, and it protected the person's foot when they were wearing it. So, I would still say, yeah, let's go ahead and use it, because buying metatarsal boots with metatarsal guards in them can get pretty expensive sometimes. So, it's one of those damned if you do and damned if you don't things.
I don't know if you might have just answered this additional question. What is the recommendation on the metatarsal add-on covers?
Well, like I said, I would, if I'd thought about it, I would have brought the manufacturers things up. There are 2 or 3 of them now that are being made that lace into the tops of your boots, and most of them do have some type of rating on them. Like I said, we use the IMET guards. The other option for metatarsal guarding is buying shoes that have the metatarsal guards built into them, which are rated by ANSI. I think it's Z41, and like I said, sometimes those are very expensive. And as far as safety-toed shoes, unless the employee is not allowed to wear them out of the plant, or can't wear them out of the plant for some reason, and they can't be used outside, then the employer does not have to buy safety-toed shoes for the person. They can tell them, hey, you have to have these to work here, and the employee has to go out and get proper safety-toed shoes and wear them at the plant. So, you know, sometimes people can't afford to go out and spend $200 on a pair of boots. So that's why we supply the iMet guards that can go on top of basically any safety-toed shoe. And as long as it's, once again, training, as long as it is put on properly, I have found that it will protect the people's feet.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think that looks like all the questions that we're going to have today, Mel.
Okie doke.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you learned a lot. As always, thank you so much, Mel. We'll be talking to you very soon. And that's it for today. Thanks, everyone. Bye.